Nintendo dropped the new firmware update for the Switch 2, version 22, and this introduced, I think, one of the biggest upgrades we've seen so far for the Switch 2 that was kind of like an overnight Switch flip. And that has to do with backwards compatibility of Switch 1 games. And there is a massive library of titles. The thing is, we've been having to kind of hang out and wait to see if maybe the developer behind a third-party game maybe wants to go in and implement some changes to more have the game be suited for the Switch 2, or wait for Nintendo to come up with free updates or let's face it, paid updates. Now though, there is a wide sweeping option that you can turn on your Switch 2 and immediately make 95% of Switch 1 games just look better. And I went through and I was trying this out, and I will admit, I'm kind of blown away by this because Switch 1 games look like noticeably better. I picked out a few examples here and I want to try to showcase them here today with you guys. So if you enjoy the video, hit the like button, subscribe if you're new. First off, it's kind of difficult, I will admit, to showcase this correctly. You can take screenshots or videos with the Switch 2 and it'll do like a built-in recording, or it'll grab screenshots, but those are stuck at 720p. And what I wanted to show off was more in line with 1080p for the Switch 2 screen. So until Nintendo does some sort of upgrade there or update to more be suited to the Switch 2's LCD or in handheld mode, kind of have to point the camera at the screen. And it's not just me doing this, I'm noticing other people as well. And hopefully that will show enough of what I'm seeing in person, because even though I'm looking at some of the stuff back, like, it looks a little better. It looks significantly better in person, just trying out some of these games. Still, though, I wanted to at least showcase a couple of examples here. Now, first, if you don't already know, to turn this on, it's a toggle that is in real time, as in, if the game is running, you can suspend it, turn this off or on, and then go back into it and see the changes right then and there. So in order to do this, you go into your system settings, then to the system tab below that, and then there will be an option that says Nintendo Switch software handling. In there, handheld mode boost will be a toggle that you can turn on and off. Now, it does go through a few caveats. For example, your Joy-Cons will be seen as a Pro controller because the game just expects to be in docked mode, so you probably wouldn't be using Joy-Cons attached to the Switch in docked mode. It would just be very, very weird. Also, any games that are utilizing touch functionality, that will not be a thing here. So if the game is completely reliant on it, it's not going to work in this mode then. And the system should be pulling more power while doing all of this. So battery life should take a hit. We're not really sure at this time how much of a hit. We need to see more tests that are going to be done, I'm sure, to get an idea as to where we sit with power draw. So I guess look out for that online. I'm sure people will be running it down from 100 to near 0% and then doing it all over again multiple times for different games to get an idea as to what kind of percentage we're losing here when you turn on handheld mode boost. But provided it's not terrible in terms of what you lose in battery life, I think it's completely worth turning on for some of the graphical features that you get back from handheld to docked, and then also the resolution bump, which is going to be just about across the board here. So with that in mind, let's start with Mega Man 11. Look, you knew I was going to work Mega Man in here some way, but I will say Mega Man 11 in particular is a good use case here to show off the resolution bump. Specifically, I will say though, with the character model itself, Mega Man, as when you sweep from off to on, you'll see some improvements in some of the scenery in the background. But when you zoom in on Mega Man here, you can really see the difference. I mean, it's much, much more pixelated with boost mode off and just looks way cleaner, especially around the edges of the character model with boost mode on. And it just makes the game look significantly better in handheld mode, especially in motion. This is all off screen, as I mentioned before, so may not come through as well as I'd like, but trust me, this is a good showpiece game for boost mode in handheld mode on the Switch 2. Next, let's move over to Red Faction Guerilla, and I like to use this. It's the remastered edition. I like to use it because it does target 60 FPS, and it's a game that you would expect to be fairly demanding with all the destruction elements. I know it's a game from the Xbox 360 era, but it was doing some very impressive stuff there. But like you can see here, with boost mode off on the left and boost mode on the right, it does look better with the updated resolution. And mostly you can see that around like the edges of the character model here with some of the fabric and the coat. But even so, running around here at 60 FPS with the resolution up to 1080p, it looks really, really sharp. And I think it's just also the motion of 60 FPS just makes the game feel higher quality. So before it was just kind of more blurry with the Switch 2 stretching that image out, but even running around blowing stuff up, all the destruction doesn't seem like the frame rate is taking a big hit or anything. And that's going to be a question I'm sure we'll have with this entire mode is, okay, if you do raise the resolution and some of the graphical features that you have here that are in motion, will that lower the frame rate at all? Because the Switch 2 is still running its own emulation layer alongside the hardware. So I'm sure there will be some examples that are out there of it actually running worse with handheld boost mode on. But at least so far from what I'm seeing with Red Faction Guerilla, it's still running really, really well at the higher frame rate. Also, if you've never played Red Faction Guerilla Remastered, you really like Donkey Kong Bonanza, I'm not saying the destruction is on that level because that's just kind of ridiculous. But what is in Red Faction Guerilla is super satisfying with all the explosions and knocking down the different buildings. Still has that nice destruction element to it. Let's jump over here to Marvel's Ultimate Alliance 3. Awesome game, but also has a bit of an issue when it comes to image quality when playing on the Switch 2. And you can see here zoomed in, Spider-Man swaying back and forth, much, much better in boost mode. And look, Storm, you can make out her face. It's not really something you'd see necessarily with boost mode off, where it was kind of because of lower resolution and a lot of pixel breakup around her facial features. Not really something you could notice as much there. But the really cool thing about this is while the game is capped at 30, I'd like to see a patch to lift that. Because of the resolution bump here and the Switch 2 keeping up no problem, you don't really lose track of things happening on screen as we did previously where the image was stretched out and it looked kind of smeared and blurry. Now, everything looks pretty good overall. The game doesn't have any real slowdown or anything on the Switch 2, and it looks way better here with boost mode. So while there are many games that are going to be pushing for that 1080p resolution and showing it very, very well, there's going to be games that actually did pretty well in handheld mode before, but even so aren't going to push to the full 1080p in dock mode. Some games are just locked to 720p even in dock mode. Others have this 900p resolution. So if you take a look, for example, at Thousand Year Door, yeah, Mario does look sharper, I'd say, with boost mode on, but it's not a massive jump necessarily. I think in motion, it looks better, certainly cleaner, but I think it was going from like a 640p resolution now up to 900p. Still a jump, but not quite matching 1080p. Also the same, I'd say, with Metroid Dread, which the game looks great, mostly because I'd say the art style and some of the visual effects that it had in place already in handheld mode. And there are less jagged edges, you can say, around some of the scenery in the back, of course, with Samus herself. But just in motion, the game always looked really, really good. So these are two titles. I of course I mentioned the patch for Marvel's Ultimate Alliance 3, but like, man, I would love to see a Switch 2 version of Thousand Year Door to get that to 60 FPS, and absolutely would like to see a Switch 2 version of Metroid Dread. One, I think because they could push it to 4K, but also I feel like they'd get 120 FPS out of that game. So I think there's some really cool stuff they could do here with either of these, but boost mode does at least work with that universal toggle to make either game just look better, but not like jumping off the screen significantly better. But what I will finish up with here is a game that I think is a great example of what boost mode can do with the Switch 2 in handheld mode. And that's Skater XL, which you probably did not see that one coming. But this is one of the blurriest games I've seen in handheld mode on the Switch 2. The Switch 1, they were targeting 60 FPS, which means they had to drop the resolution pretty aggressively on it. But because it was already kind of blurry in the Switch 1, you can imagine, oh, on the Switch 2, didn't exactly look any cleaner as they're stretching the image out. And like you can see here, yeah, I mean, just looking at even the text to the right of the character here on the board, but even around the character, I mean, it actually looks like squares, like around the jeans and the shirt. Yeah, again, it's sitting at 60, which is great. Kind of a rough 60 in terms of image quality, but then with boost mode on and it uses the docked settings, it looks so much sharper. I mean, the text much more legible, but the character itself looks way, way cleaner. And the thing here is this does translate over well into the motion. So when you're moving around with the character on the board and doing different tricks. You won't see a bunch of breakup necessarily for the board or with the character, whereas with boost mode off, you can kind of see it here. Very noticeable in person, but then moving over to boost mode on, it just looks way smoother despite both of them being 60 FPS. It feels like it's actually much more fluid with boost mode on, just because that image quality isn't as so poor to where things are breaking up as they're moving. And as I mentioned, there's so many examples right now of people posting images and videos online, and I left out some of the obvious ones like Xenoblade Chronicles 2 that does look better, mostly because they removed the sharpening filter that they for some reason put on it in handheld mode. It's just that is a rough game in handheld mode no matter what, and that's probably the at the top of most people's list that absolutely needs a Switch 2 patch. I've also seen Bayonetta 3 coming up that does also look much sharper. Also, I don't think that one's hitting 1080p even in the Switch 2 boost mode docked settings. So another good candidate, I feel like, for a Switch 2 update, but this is really good, I think, for games that you can probably count out the idea of either the third-party developer going back or even Nintendo. This should work very well for a lot of visual novel games where the text doesn't necessarily scale great for a 720p image being stretched out, and things can look a little fuzzy there. So just, I mean, an awesome update here for the Switch 2, and one that I think makes going back to some of these Switch 1 games interesting all over again. Remember when the Switch 2 first came out, a lot of us were going back and just checking out these games to see how they are running. Now, everyone's going back and checking them out again because you can play it with docked settings, but in Switch 2 handheld mode. So really cool stuff. Let me know, though, down in the comments if there are any specific games that really jumped out to you that you had a chance to try with the boost mode on, and what kind of upgrades you were seeing there in person. Thanks, guys, for watching, and I'll see you next time.